My aunt, although she was not welcome, ended up inviting herself to spend the holidays with us, which caused discomfort. During my childhood, she always thought she was superior to me and my sister, looking down on us. Furthermore, my mother and she had a bit of a history of disagreements, especially when I started dating my husband at age 19 while he was 26. For our first Christmas together, we went to my grandparents' house, where tradition dictated that the oldest take care of the youngest until they reach adulthood. My husband, however, expressed his dissatisfaction when my aunt expected him to take care of the children, as we were already childless adults. This comment was not well received by my aunt and mother, who spoke negatively about him for the next 5 years. Then, in late 2020, my aunt started coming to our house weekly, with my mother insinuating that we treated her better than her own children. That same year, our children were about to graduate from high school, and I wanted to treat them to a trip to Disney and Universal Studios in Florida as a graduation gift. Since I had worked 2 jobs before they went to college, we hadn't had the time or resources for that. Initially, we kept our plans a secret, but the information was leaked to my aunt and mother. At first, my mother agreed that it would just be my children, my husband, and I on the trip, but later we decided that my aunt could also go, since she showed interest. Although we weren't thrilled with the idea, we knew that based on past experience it would be best to give in to avoid conflict. While planning our trip, we chose to drive to Florida because, given the size of our children, it would save us a lot of money compared to flying. However, my aunt insisted on using her car, despite my husband's concerns about the vehicle's wear and tear. We gave in again to avoid friction. The trip would be made by just the 4 of us, as my mother and aunt chose to travel by plane and I would have to pick them up at the airport, which was an hour away from our hotel. As we were planning the trip, I asked everyone if there was anything specific they wanted to do since we needed to make park reservations due to the pandemic. Based on everyone's wishes, I decided which parks we would visit during our stay and continued to plan our adventure. My aunt seemed to agree with all the plans and was grateful that I was organizing everything. We started our trip, leaving the kids and my husband at Disney Springs while I left to pick up my mother and aunt at the airport. Unfortunately, their flight was delayed by an hour, which no one had announced before they boarded. It would have been helpful if they had notified me via message. After picking them up, we headed to the hotel to check in and accommodate them in their rooms. My mother, who had mobility issues, had rented a scooter for the week, and my aunt suggested that if she had difficulty in the parks, she could rent a scooter there too. I would like to point out that I myself had back problems and normally couldn't stand or walk for long periods, but I was working on my stamina for this trip in the hopes that I wouldn't need a scooter. The car wasn't big enough to accommodate all of us, plus 2 or 3 scooters. We decided we would use our car to drive to the parks as it was quicker and more convenient. The next day, we planned to visit Universal Studios, and since we were staying on Disney property, the most practical option was to drive. However, it is important to mention that we were now 6 people and a scooter in one car. The first disagreement occurred while we were looking for the entrance to Diagon Alley to buy the children's wands. None of us except my aunt had any experience at Universal Studios, so we were a little lost. I was checking the app to find my way, and my aunt started criticizing my lack of guidance, questioning if I knew where we were going. I replied that it was my first time there and that I had no knowledge of the area. She huffed and continued to complain, including making nasty comments about me and my children. I suggested that, given that she had visited the park before, she take the lead, but she refused, insisting that I was better at finding our way. Eventually we found the entrance to Diagon Alley and bought wands, trying not to let the previous friction ruin our day. We decided to split up, as there were trips that my mother and aunt couldn't go on. We ate lunch separately, with my husband and I going in one direction, our children in another, and my mother and aunt in another place. While we were waiting in line for one of the rides, my mom called me and said that my aunt was trying to rent a scooter, but the park was out of availability. She intended to take the car and go back to the hotel. I explained that she had her car keys, but she stated that she had spare keys and would come back for us. This made me panic, as I knew her history of ignoring calls and texts, as well as falling soundly asleep during the night. I suggested she take an Uber or taxi back to the hotel, as we had no guarantee she would come back for us. Plus, it would be much more expensive for us to get a ride back to the hotel than it would be for her to use a shuttle. She then argued that the car was hers, to which I replied that since we had switched cars and she had mine, it was technically my car until I got it back. I argued that she couldn't just leave us stranded at Universal. We had different transport options available, so the car issue shouldn't be a big problem. We were preparing for a possible dispute over the use of the vehicle. At the customer service desk, I called my aunt and learned that there was a scooter available for her. She agreed to the idea and tensions around the car eased. I thought that might be the end of the complications. Although I was a little irritated, I was determined to enjoy our vacation. However, this was just the beginning of the problems. The next day we were at the Disney parks, and I decided that my kids deserved to have fun since it looked like they would be stuck with my mom and aunt for the entire trip. The morning went well, but in the afternoon things started to deteriorate. My aunt continued to make snarky comments about how I was making all the decisions about our script, etc. I replied that she was free to follow the path she preferred, as my only decision was to choose which park to visit. This attitude of hers persisted throughout the week at Disney. She continued to criticize me and speak ill of me to my family, and even to strangers who passed by. Each time I responded, it seemed like it only fueled her negative attitude more. She expressed a desire to dine at a themed restaurant called Science Fiction Restaurant, where the tables and booths are designed to look like cars and picnic tables, creating a drive-in feel. However, given our group of 6, it was a challenge to find suitable seating, and we ended up at a picnic table rather than a car table. My aunt and my mother made such an embarrassing scene that the manager finally gave in and found us a table in the car. I was extremely embarrassed, and at the end of dinner I apologized to the manager and waitress for their rude behavior. I discovered that neither my mother nor my aunt had left a tip, although the waitress had been extremely attentive and deserved it. I went back to correct this mistake, adding more money to the tip, as she deserved it. That was the highlight of the week we spent with them at Disney. Every day after the first, my aunt insisted on knowing when we would take her back to her car, claiming that she no longer wanted to drive due to the unpleasant smell. From the beginning, we already knew that we would stay a week longer than them due to our other plans. The last day at Disney arrived, and I had made a reservation for a character dinner, as requested by my aunt. However, due to social distancing measures, characters were no longer allowed to go near the tables. They remained in a specific location, interacting with guests to take photos and things like that. I explained this to my mother and aunt, asking if they were okay with this situation. They said yes, but constantly complained about how they couldn't hug Mickey or Pluto. Once again, they left no tip for the waiter, who went out of his way to make sure we had everything we needed. Since they couldn't hug the characters, they considered it the worst meal ever. At this point, I was really tired of dealing with them. After finishing our meal, paying the bill, and leaving a generous tip for the staff, my husband and I headed out to enjoy some sightseeing before returning to the hotel. There was a trip my mom wanted us to go on together, but she didn't tell me about it, so we went ahead without her. We met with them after the tour, and she was visibly irritated. We offered to continue the tour, as there was no queue and we were enjoying it, but she insisted on going back to the hotel. The next day, I took them to the airport in uncomfortable silence and let them go. I cannot express the relief I felt to see them go. I later learned that my aunt had left my mother at the airport to fend for herself in a wheelchair with her luggage. My aunt had the tickets on her cell phone, so I was worried about how my mother would be able to board the plane without help. Fortunately, a mother traveling with her children helped her contact her. After they left, we continued our trip to Arizona, and our vacation became lighter. My husband and I started having fun, thinking this was all over. However, when we returned home, we realized we were mistaken. Almost every day, my aunt would text my husband, avoiding contact with me, asking when we were going to return her car. My husband explained to her the same thing we had said since the beginning of the trip. When we reached the Colorado-Omaha border, we started to worry that she might report the car stolen, which could cost me my job. Fortunately, she didn't do that. We cleaned and filled the car's gas tank, delivering it in better condition than when she lent it to us. When we finally delivered her car and picked up mine, my uncle was at home with a serious look. He didn't say a word to me and he seemed to believe that I would do something against my aunt. I realized that she was spreading negative stories about me to her family. I didn't know what my uncle was planning, but surprisingly, he seemed shocked by my attitude. He just wanted to get out of there and go home. I gave her the keys, and she passed them to my husband, and we got into our car. As soon as I got into my car, I felt a burst of anger. It was in terrible condition and almost out of gas, even though I had delivered it clean and with a full tank. That night, my aunt sent my husband a text thanking him for cleaning the car, and I had to admit it was cleaner than when she gave it to us. As we left my aunt's house, my husband turned to me and said, "Yes, I was right. That lady has been a terrible person for 20 years. To this day, that side of my family doesn't communicate with me, and I'm okay with that. My mother is still very upset about the way my aunt and uncle treated her, and she doesn't voluntarily talk to me. If in the future we decide to tell family about our travel plans, we will tell everyone that it will just be the four of us and that we will not allow anyone else to join." This was the first big family vacation we'd had since the boys were born, and my aunt and mom ruined it for us. At least my kids had fun, as I didn't allow them to get swept up in the drama. Oh man, these people are very different from me. I would have cut them out of my life a long time ago. I can't help but admire how they managed to endure the trip with these two people. It must have been a real nightmare, as it was described. I can't even imagine going through something like that. Congratulations to them for having much more patience than I would have. I feel foolish for trying to set boundaries with my mother-in-law before she separates my partner and me. We've been together for 7 years, and my mother-in-law has always had difficulty respecting boundaries. She is a single mother to my partner, who is an only child, and she has never seemed to get over the fact that he now has someone else in his life. Even when he tried to retreat, she would simply relax temporarily and then slowly invade again. When we first started dating, I used to think it was weird but cute that her mom still made him lunch and made his tea when she was at his house. She also took care of washing her clothes. He told me that she never taught him how to wash his own clothes or use an iron, so I ended up having to teach him. However, after we moved in together, I realized that his mother was there every day. She would come to our house, whether we were there or not, because she had a key. She cleaned the house, went into every room, changed my things, and even picked up my dirty clothes. I told her repeatedly to stop, but she simply ignored my request and continued. Over the years this intrusion has increased, and I have told her countless times to stop, but she always claims she is trying to help and that we are too busy. I'm not a confrontational person, so I'm just grateful, although what I really want to say is that I'm 35 years old and I don't accept anyone interfering with my things in my own house, which I paid for myself. The situation gets worse because she looks after our son at our house once or twice a week when we are both at work. During these times, she keeps going through my clothes, changing things in our room, and going into rooms where she has absolutely no reason to be. She even took items belonging to my son that I had set aside for donation and hid them in the attic, then brought them back home. We have security cameras, and I caught her coming into our house when we were out and going through things until someone came home. I've had arguments with her about this, but she just ignores them and leaves. I usually end up texting her asking her to stop, but she reads the message and never responds. We recently discovered we are expecting another child after experiencing 2 miscarriages. It's still early days, so we're keeping it under wraps. My family doesn't know about the miscarriages, and I kept my prenatal vitamins and an extra pregnancy test in my underwear drawer, hidden under some things so they wouldn't be seen. However, this morning when I opened my drawer, I discovered that she had moved it yesterday as the test and vitamins were disturbed. I feel this overwhelming urge to scream and cry and tell her to never come back. I feel like I have no privacy in my own home, and the pressure is making me sick and causing discord between me and my partner. Unfortunately, I can't just ask her to leave and never come back. She has an incredible bond with my daughter, and my partner would never abandon her mother as she has no one else. Furthermore, we cannot pay for childcare outside of nursery hours without her help. Therefore, she needs to have a key to our house. I've decided that I'm going to talk to her in person today and try to have a serious conversation about boundaries and intrusions. I want this to be the last time we need to have this conversation. I'm someone who avoids confrontation, so how do I express my position in a firm but non-provocative way? Honestly, I think maybe putting our daughter at her grandmother's house could solve some problems. It also looks like you need to change some locks. If your husband is legitimately weird and doesn't want to keep his mom out of the house, then you need to have a serious talk with him. This is obviously bothering you, and he needs to support you. There's no reason for you to feel like you can't have privacy in your own home. In my opinion, leave your daughter at her house, change her locks, and don't hesitate to set boundaries with both your husband and mother-in-law. Tell both of you that this is unacceptable and that things need to change. Regarding the situation with your ex-boyfriend using your photos online, this is very upsetting and unacceptable. You did the right thing by breaking up with him for being abusive. If he continues to use your photos inappropriately, you may consider consulting the authorities or seeking legal help to ensure your safety and privacy. Remember that your safety and well-being are priorities. Has anyone been through a similar situation? Is there anything I can do? I'm unsure how seriously the police would take this, given the lack of evidence and the fact that no one was immediately in danger. However, considering he is already on parole, this could be relevant. What do you think I should do? Honestly, I would recommend you report this to the police. It is important to note the fact that this individual is clearly violating your privacy and inappropriately using your image to engage with others. Even if it's just a catfish situation, authorities can reach out to social media platforms to track down IP addresses or data that could help shed light on what's going on. There is nothing more upsetting than someone impersonating you online, and I truly hope that person finds the solutions they need to move forward and move away from this awkward situation. Today, I made a mistake when I told my mom I got a piercing. My father and I kept it a secret for 5 years because we knew she wouldn't be happy. I grew up in a very strict household, where my mother set rules about schedules, tattoos, piercings, and even tracked my location since I was 16. However, I decided to finally share this information with her today. When I was 17, I first mentioned to my mom that she wanted a piercing. We had several conversations in which every point I raised was met with a no. This continued until I was 19 when I moved to university. It was at that moment that I decided to get the piercing, but I didn't tell my mother, as she was afraid of her reaction and confrontation. I never argued with her, because she scared me deeply. Today, suddenly, while we were having a conversation, I shared with her about the piercing I got 5 years ago. Surprisingly, at first, she calmly agreed. I showed her the piercing, and although she didn't like it, she said it was no longer her business since I'm almost 25 now. However, she asked if my father knew, and that's where I made a mistake. I answered yes without thinking, and she exploded in anger. She's mad because my dad didn't tell her and kept it a secret all this time. According to her, her ex-husband used to lie to her when they were together, and she and my father had no secrets from each other. She brought up the fact that when I told her about my sexual orientation, she immediately shared it with my dad and they talked about it. She can't believe he kept this from her. I've never seen her react this way before, and I'm perplexed. I am now completely devastated that I caused this situation and that I potentially irreversibly damaged their marriage and relationship. This all happened because I was too scared to tell my mom about my piercing when I was younger. First of all, it's not her fault for not sharing this with them. Obviously, you were apprehensive about talking to your mother. Secondly, her reaction was excessive and irrational. It would be a different situation if your father was hiding some dark secret that really affected their marriage. It seems like the mother is just trying to find reasons to be offended. Maybe there's something more going on between her and her husband that isn't being revealed in this story. Being so upset because your dad didn't tell you about your piercing is kind of weird to me. There is no reason for you to feel guilty about living your life. This situation says more about the mother than it does about you. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, don't forget to click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Also, take the opportunity to explore other stories at the top of the description using the playlist. I hope you enjoyed this amazing story from our HistoReddit channel. If you like the content and want to continue following the most fascinating stories on the internet, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any exciting episode. Your support is essential to keep the stories flowing. Thank you for being part of our community and see you in the next video.